You know, every once in a while, one gets a chance to collect long-standing intellectual ammunition, wisdom for the ages. And without intending to do so, Goya CEO Robert Unanue and an Argentine Jesuit are offering the world just that. In separate South American countries, their capitalist-sourced actions are revealing the terrible error and the falsity of Argentine Pope Francis's embrace of collectivism and rejection of free markets. It's time for a deep lesson into the moral underpinnings of the free market. Hi everyone, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV. The moral underpinnings of the free market, something very important to remember for all time. And as Mary L.G. Thoreau reports for the Independent Institute, in Francis's home nation of Argentina, a nation that once was one of the most prosperous in South America, but which Juan Perón and subsequent political controllers saddled with decades of collectivist policies and turned into an economic basket case, a priest has teamed up with a businessman and many more local and international marketeers to help the destitute during a time of particular trouble. Father Rodrigo Zarazaga is the priest, and as Thoreau explains, he has partnered with businessman Gaston Remy and more than 200 local and foreign companies to establish Somos Uno, Let's Be One, to feed more than 4 million people who live in the villas, slums, ringing Buenos Aires. This despite the fact that Argentine-born Pope Francis has been critical of and mischaracterized the free market that allows for that surplus to be donated in the first place. The Somos Uno program is providing a sorely needed lifeline with an effort combining Argentina's top logistic companies filling 17,000 food boxes per shift with global auditing giants Deloitte, KPMG, and PwC tracking deliveries made by Catholic and evangelical volunteers armed with an app developed by consulting firm Accenture. Meanwhile, in the socialist dystopia of Venezuela, Goya's CEO, Mr. Unanue, actually has expanded his charitable efforts beyond what we recently saw mentioned at the White House. Behind the scenes, Goya is quietly coming to the rescue of the suffering citizens of another country that has quickly fallen from being South America's wealthiest to perhaps its poorest under its socialist regime, Venezuela. Working with the Catholic Church and local organizations, Goya has snuck in an estimated 180,000 pounds of food, and in June announced it would be sending another 220,000. The point being that these people are doing good work. And by the way, Thoreau notes that when in 2011 Unanue worked with Barack Obama on an Hispanic education initiative, he didn't receive the mountains of leftist criticism he received for his recent White House appearance. And they're offering Pope Francis lessons he badly needs to learn. They're showing him that capitalism is not materialism. That, in fact, the philosophy at the heart of capitalism is the opposite of materialism, and that his criticism of capitalism and, by association, his seeming embrace of state-run collectivism and regulation is precisely the wrong approach to expand peaceful coexistence, good health, and spiritual liberty. While Francis has not explicitly called for communism or socialism by name, he has embraced many of the primary collectivist tenets and has promoted them in another, even less endearing way. He's led people to an implied collectivist conclusion by insinuating that natural rights-based market freedom is somehow sinful and destructive to the world. As Jack Kerwick writes for BeliefNet.com, it's not just that Francis has not explicitly repudiated collectivism. Not decrying something doesn't imply that one accepts or applauds it. The problem for Pope Francis is that he has many times gone out of his way to attack the fundamental precepts of markets, leaving only its antagonist collectivism as the alternative within his implied worldview. Couric observes that Francis has referred to ours as, quote, an economy of exclusion and inequality, end quote. Today, he explains, everything comes under the laws of competition and the survival of the fittest, where the powerful feed upon the powerless. As a consequence, Francis concludes, masses of people find themselves excluded and marginalized, without work, without possibilities, without any means of escape. Pope Francis, you gotta take an economics class. And not at a liberal college either. I suggest the Foundation for Economic Education or something, please. Which, as anyone who has the faintest clue about economics knows, is precisely the opposite of capitalism. As the Pilgrims discovered by switching away from collectivism and adopting property-based capitalism in 1620, it is political collectivism that brings about starvation, that allows only the fittest to survive, and that sees little chance of escape. Markets offer opportunities not only for survival, but for improvement and for the surplus that allows for sharing and greater charity. Hence the surplus that saw the Pilgrims invite their Indian neighbors to join them in the bounty of the first Thanksgiving, where, as Governor William Bradford stated in his own diary, they thanked God for giving them the wisdom to turn away from collectivism and adopt private market exchange based on private property. Evidently, Jesuit theologian Francis has forgotten or never learned the lesson of the Puritans' first Thanksgiving. Not only has Francis avoided that timeless, important lesson, he's praised government regulation, i.e., politicians and bureaucrats commanding people to not engage in peaceful action or engage in it in the way that the politicians command. Even as recently as June, Francis again sang his siren song of environmental regulation in a 225-page encyclical. But at the end of all such regulation to supposedly help this Mother Earth worldview is the threat of state-backed force of arms. And the result is impoverishment. Less opportunity to help the environment, less recognition of private property, which is necessary to allow people harmed by toxins to sue for damage, and less opportunity to create new, more efficient resources. Francis has gone so far as to even claim that a capitalist economy kills. But, as Thoreau writes, both Mr. Unanaway in Venezuela and Reverend Zarazaga in the same Buenos Aires neighborhoods Pope Francis served during his years as a priest are demonstrating a truth that has eluded the Pope. Capitalism, far from being the economy of exclusion that Francis has termed it, rather provides the economic plenty that makes private charitable giving possible, and incents the beneficiaries of such plenty to share it inclusively with others. It's not just the centuries of economic evidence Pope Francis might want to read, it's the moral, the philosophical, the spiritual, the theological lesson he desperately needs to grasp. Contrary to what his histrionics imply or outright state, unfettered capitalism is not the same as materialism. In fact, capitalism, real capitalism, not crony capitalism, more precisely termed mercantilism, is simply freedom. In fact, it is natural rights-based freedom to own oneself and the fruits of one's labor, to engage in voluntary association and trade, and to mutually respect the rights of others. And any philosophical exploration of natural rights directly leads explorers to self-ownership, individual rights, free will, and the Christian God who requires human free will to choose him as Savior. Without exercising free will, there can be no salvation, and political collectivism attacks free will. It also destroys the great benefits market growth allows. Rather than deriding capitalism, Francis might want to look at South America, where nations like Venezuela and his own Argentina have been hobbled by collectivism, and where the leveraged surplus of market-based profit is sneaking in to help the poor. Well, perhaps if he did that, he would see the tragedy his collectivist mentality continues to create. Thanks so much for joining us during this time where we can gather some great lessons and put together some pieces of wisdom in a really chaotic world. For MRC-TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith. I hope you'll join us at mrctv.org. Head over to MRC-store and visit us on YouTube. Subscribe, like, share, do everything you can right now because it's terrific to be in touch with you. Again, for MRC-TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.